Welcome to Interactive Storytelling. Last time, I promised that we will search for interactivity from various ways of telling stories. This time, we take a fast trip through time from ancient worlds all the way to modern day. Along our path will be 3 stops: literature, theatre, and non-digital games. All of them have several thousand years of history, so we have a lot of ground to cover. Luckily for you, we'll skip much of the boring bits and focus on some highlights. But before all this, people were telling stories to each other. Somewhere along the way emerged a special class of people who specialized in telling stories: the bards. Storytelling in this bardic tradition was interactive. The bard would have to adapt the story according to the audience. If the audience did not respond favorably to the storyteller would have to change the approach. Even epics such as the Iliad and the Odyssey started out as bardic tales and went through several centuries and countless generations of bards before they were first written down and attributed to Homer. The introduction of the printing press in the 15th century made written word the preferred medium for distributing stories faster and to a wider audience. We don't call the bard a bard anymore, but an author. Now the author creates a written work. This work gets then printed, and as a result we have a pile of copies of the work. These copies then get distributed to the audience, or readers as we may call them. Each of them has now a copy of the original work, printed and bound, to study. If somebody has now something to say, question, or criticize, there's no immediate way to do it. One could try to contact the author privately, or could write and publish their own counter-argument. Any which way they choose, the turnaround is much slower than when the bard was telling the story themselves to the audience. And if you now recall one of Crawford's 3 degrees of interactivity, speed is important for interaction. New inventions such as film and television didn't change the situation much. They also reproduce the crafted narrative in the same way and provide all spectators the same presented story. Let's turn our gaze away from literature for a moment and focus on theatre. Western theatre has its roots in ancient Greece, where the plays were performed according to scripts. Interactivity and immersion are 2 facets of theatre. Their roles have varied throughout history. Ryan recognizes 4 stage designs that arrange the theatrical space, putting emphasis on either immersion or interactivity. In a circular arena, the audience is surrounding the actors from all sides. You can think of modern sports stadium as an example of this. The audience are not only spectators, but they are taking part in the experience interactively by commenting, cheering, booing, shouting, clapping their hands or turning silent. Sport venues are typically based on this design. In a classical Greek stage design, the actors and the audience are separated to the stage and to the seats. This leads to a compromise of immersion and interactivity. The audience can still participate in the play, but it is becoming more a spectacle to be immersed in. In the Italian stage design of the Baroque era in the 17th century, the actors play on a lit and decorated stage, whereas the audience is seated in darkness. They are even further divided by a proscenium and an orchestral bit. All this leads to an immersive design that emphasizes the spectacle and discourages interaction. In avant-garde theatre of the 1950s and 60s, the actors and audience are often intermingled, with some members appearing on stage, possibly taking part in the disciplined action, and some actors being outside of the focus among the spectators. This leads to high interactivity. Interaction with the audience requires the actors to improvise. An early example of this is Commedia dell'arte, Comedy of Craft, which started out in the 16th century Italy as a form of improvised performances based on sketches or scenarios. A typical Commedia dell'arte performance would include characters from a roster including stereotypical features, some of which later evolved to modern-day circus characters. Modern-day improvisational theatre formed in the 1970s. It's an intricate collaboration between the actors and the audience. The actor should react believably and in an emotionally engaging way at every point of the performance. The audience can affect the performance providing the actors cues on the situation, style, and their characters' attributes. After this sidestep to theatre, let's come back to literature. As we saw earlier, the written work is intended to be read in the order that the author had in mind. So you start at the beginning on page 1. Then you continue and read page 2, and page 3, and so forth until you're at the end of the work. Nothing spectacular here. We've all done this time and again. We can call this unicursal literature because there's only one way how to read the text. There's only one path through it. This isn't the only way to compose a text. You could create a multicursal work which has 2 or more possible ways to read it. Let's take one example. Imagine that you have written a work where you have sections fitting nicely and neatly into one page. Instead of imposing an order for the sections, you could allow the reader to choose their own way through it. For example, the reader could shuffle the loose pages of your work like a deck of cards and then lay them down to be read. Now you have a random permutation of your text, unique for this particular reader. This would be an ultimate multicursal work because any permutation is allowed. For example, Mark Sapota's Composition No. 1, published in 1962, is a novel with pages like a deck of cards to be shuffled and read in any sequence. Julio Cortázar's Hopscotch, published originally in Spanish in 1963 and translated to English in 1966, is a novel that can be read following either the sequence of chapters indented by the author or uniquely by the reader making their own sequence. Third example is B.S. Johnson's The Unfortunates, published in 1969, which has 27 chapters and only the first and the last chapter are indicated, leaving the reader free to choose the order for the remaining 25 chapters. If you were put now into the author's position, you'd have to give up a lot of control. It would be hard to create such a text. Probably you'd end up making pastiche or loosely connected passages. Effectively, you have lost control of the time and causality. Maybe there's another way to create multicursal works. Okay, let's get back to the drawing board. The previous example was too uncontrolled. It allowed too many possibilities for us to handle. What if we try to start with a unicursal story? First, we write a beginning. For example, the protagonist is packing her suitcase because she's leaving for a trip abroad later that day. A delivery guy brings her a packet from her uncle, attached with a note asking her to visit him before leaving the country. She puts the packet in her bag and calls a taxi. Then we write what happens next. Our protagonist visits her uncle on the way to the airport. The uncle looks disheveled and warns her not to travel away. She's not convinced, says goodbye, and continues to the airport. Let's stop here, and instead of continuing unicursally forward, let's go back to the beginning. Let's create an alternative of what could happen. Our protagonist doesn't go to see her uncle, but gets straight to the airport to the check-in. Now, we can offer the reader a choice. If you want to visit your uncle, go to page 2. If you want to go straight to the airport, go to page 3. Our unicursal story has now turned into a multicursal story. Okay, if the reader wanted to visit the uncle, we can continue after that with the same scene at the check-in. We can continue writing the same way. We can again offer choice to board the plane and continue from page 4. Or to branch to another scene on page 8, where the protagonist decides to open the packet and find out what's in it. The first choice continues on, and the protagonist is on the plane and orders a drink. The story continues with new scenes and events. At some point, the story may lead back to a previous scene, so the protagonist orders another drink and encounters similar events like before. And to allow the reader to escape the loop we now created, let's offer a new choice leading forward from page 5 to page 7. However, that will conclude the story along this line, and our protagonist safely lands to her destination. If we go back to the second choice, opening the packet, that leads to page 8, we can offer multiple choices. The protagonist decides to call her uncle and demands him to explain why she should take the packet with her. Based on that, she faces 3 choices, and each of them will offer a different ending to the story. One could be that she decides to toss the packet in a garbage bin. Another could be that she decides to rewrap it and take it along to the plane. And the third one could be that she decides to abandon her trip and return the packet back to her uncle. As a story, this might feel a bit unsatisfactory, but I hope you began to see how the author can weave several plotlines together. Another thing you might have observed is that this kind of storytelling gets pretty complex very quickly. One of the earliest examples of this kind of multicursal literature is Doris Webster's and Mary Eldon Hopkins' novel Consider the Consequences, published in 1930. It offers the reader a possibility to choose how the story turns at various points, just like in our example. Much later, this type of works were labeled gamebooks. One of the most known brand of gamebooks is the Choose Your Own Adventure series by Bantam Books. It was also very successful. It sold over 250 million copies between its launch in 1979 and phase out in 1998. Gamebooks are not so far away from our next topic, role-playing games or RPGs, because some of them use RPG mechanics, worlds and characters as a basis for the story. Role-playing games evolved from fantasy wargames in the 1970s. The most influential RPG is Dungeons & Dragons, designed by Dave Arneson and Gary Gygax, which was published in 1974. The setup for a tabletop role-playing game is simple. First you need, of course, a tabletop. Then you need a group of people participating in the game. Each of them builds a character using mechanisms provided by the game and assumes the identity of their character. And finally, you need a game master who runs the game by maintaining the rules and leading the players through the game. To keep the players focused on the scenario, the game master can use various storytelling devices. For example, the game master controls all the non-player characters or NPCs. The game master acts partly as a proxy for the original game designer and partly as an author creating new content for the players. In some sense, this resembles the situation of storytelling in the bardic tradition, but here the interaction is more formalized. No wonder then that RPGs got soon computerized in the early 1980s. The idea was to use algorithms to model the game master. Also, the number of human players was reduced to 1. This meant that the social interaction was cut down into a solitary activity, much like what happened to storytelling with the introduction of written word. The stories that a computer can tell and the reactions that a computer can provide are of course much narrower than what a human game master is able to create. The lack of interaction with other players got better at the late 1990s when technical improvements in networking allowed to have multiplayer or even massive multiplayer role-playing games. Still, human interaction is important, which introduces us another direction that the evolution of tabletop RPGs took. Live-action role-playing, or LARPing, emerged in the late 1970s. It converted tabletop RPG to experiences in the physical world. There is a predefined setting and backstory. The players then create or receive their characters and adopt their behavior accordingly during the play. The bigger events can include hundreds of LARPers and can last for several days and disperse into large areas. For this reason, the role of the game master is often limited into making the initial setup. Once the event is on its way, the LARPers will act without any centralized control, and the story will emerge from the LARPers' interaction, much like in improvisational theatre. After this detour to role-playing games, let's return to multicursal literature. Or rather, let's see how it evolved with the advent of digital media. Hypertext is an obvious candidate for realizing multicursal literature. You can prepare a section of text as an electronic document. You don't even have to limit yourself to text, but you can include illustrations, sound, or video. You can even omit the text altogether. So, at the end, you have a set of documents comprising the totality of your work. All these documents are bound together by hyperlinks that allow the reader to jump from document to document with ease. This kind of hypertext fiction emerged in the mid-1980s, when the primary distribution media for such works was CD-ROM. From the mid-1990s onwards, the World Wide Web allowed the works to be distributed much easier to much larger audience. Despite the public attention that hypertext fiction got in the 1990s, it never lived up to the expectations. It turned out to be difficult to write and maintain, and other forms of digital media, such as blogs and social networks, soon took its place. Digital media made also possible to create episodic online stories, or webisodics. The author of of episodic releases content over time to the public. The initial releases help to establish the setup and the characters. They also aim at attracting audience who starts following the series. An important part of the process is that the audience is encouraged to provide input on the series. This feedback and suggestions are used for preparing further content. In order to keep the series alive, especially if its funding relies on, for example, advertisements, is the increase of the audience. The feedback helps to develop the series further. This iterative loop maintains the development of new episodes. The earliest example of episodic online story is Tracy Reed's Quantum Link serial, which ran on AOL from 1988 to 1989. After each week's chapter, members of the audience could write to Reed and suggest how they could be part of the story, and she would then select few of them and write them into the next chapter using their input to change the story. The term webisode was coined to describe Scott Zakarin's website The Spot, which was active from 1995 to 1997. It took its inspiration from television series such as Friends and Melrose Place and had characters known as spotmates who were living in the same house. The spotmates would keep an online diary, respond to emails from the audience, post images and short videos on their life. Members of the audience could become part of the storyline and give advice to the characters. Later webisodics used emerging digital media, such as video streaming services and social networks, as a part of the storytelling. To wrap up this video, let's take a quick and non-comprehensive look at some non-digital games based on storytelling. Once Upon a Time is a card game where the players tell a fairy tale as a group according to the rules. Each player has cards depicting typical fairy tale characters, objects, and events. If the story turns out to involve a symbol depicted in the card, the player can get rid of it. The player who can play a special Happy Ever After card as their last card wins. Dread is a horror role-playing game which uses the game mechanics of Jenga to create suspense. A player trying something daring has to pull out blocks from a Jenga tower. The more daring, the more blocks. If the tower collapses, the player dies and is out of the game. Dixit includes a deck of illustrated cards used to tell a story. The player whose turn is to be the storyteller chooses one card and makes a sentence based on it. The other players choose among their cards the one that matches the best. The storyteller's card and the other player's cards are then shuffled and revealed, and the players vote which was the actual card. Based on the vote, the storyteller or the players get points. Fiasco directs the players to tell crime stories where things go horribly wrong, in the spirit of the movie Fargo. The game mechanics includes a set of rules that form the overall structure of the story and a set of dice that provide a random element for the storytelling process. Based on this framework, the players then take part in creating and telling a complete story. Rory's Story Cubes includes a special set of dice where each side is printed with different symbols. The player's challenge is to cast the dice and then tell a story using all the face-up symbols only once. This concludes our first dive into the forms of interactive storytelling. Let's get back to the surface now and catch our breath before taking another dive. In the next video, we will submerge ourselves into the world of interactive cinema and television. See you there.